Hi, and welcome. I'm Steve Martireno, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while.
Hey, everybody, how are you? And welcome to the Behavioral Corner. It's me hanging where you last saw me, on the corner. You know what we do here? We're lucky. We run into all kinds of people that are coming and going, and they hang with us and sit on the stoop, and they always have great stories. It's funny how it works out. The Behavioral Corner, of course, is underwritten by our good friends from Retreat Behavioral Health. So today, you know what? It's sort of like, you know, if you stand in one place long enough, you're going to run into everybody you ever knew in your life. And that's what happened to us on the corner. Bang, look, coming out of the bodega across the street is an old pal. Reed Alexander is as I said, a former colleague. We worked together briefly back in the day. He is also a journalist, an author, and an actor, AKA, for those of you young enough to remember, he is Neville Papperman from the Nickelodeon program iCarly. Now, though, hard-charging reporter, great asset for our program and for everybody else who want information about a wide range of things. Reed, welcome to the corner.
Steve, it is such a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation to come and hang out with you today and talk about some very interesting topics. You're a friend and a former colleague and someone whom I greatly admire on this broadcast. So it's really a delight to get to be part of your show today.
Well, thanks. It's great to see you too. So let me frame it by saying that no one within the sound or sight of us will be surprised to hear that the COVID virus and the pandemic has had a profound impact, not only on the United States, but all over the world. Mm-hmm. The horrible results of this virus are apparent. They run the gamut physically, everything from, hospitalization, sickness, serious consequences, often in long-term recovery for survivors. And then, of course, the toll in death, 4 million worldwide now and counting, because now we're in a second wave of that. So we know that. What we do not know, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this, there's more unfortunate news, and that is that this virus has had a profound effect collaterally on our mental health. We've touched upon a couple of these things on the corner, the effects of isolation and lockdown and all that on our mental health. But Reed has spent some time in his role now as a reporter for the Business Insider, taking a look at what the scientists and the data and the researchers are telling us about the collateral damage from COVID-19. And I'm really grateful for him taking time to talk to us about it. Reed, I know you looked at a bunch of different studies, one of which from the University of Michigan, which took a broad view of the entire spectrum of mental health impact. So tell us about that study. I know it looked at 4 particular groups of people affected. Who were those people?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I recently reported for Business Insider on a study that was done by researchers at the University of Michigan. And what they determined was, as you say, there are 4 groups or 4 core constituencies of people in the US who have been disproportionately impacted by the effects of the pandemic from a mental health perspective. So one is just women generally, right? Women across the board. Another is people ages 50 to 64, both men and women. A third group was people who reported that they were either in fair or poor physical health. So fair to say people sort of in weakened physical condition, right? And we know that the pandemic has, really negatively affected people who were dealing with overweight or immunocompromised if they were to contract the virus. And then the fourth group, and I found this especially interesting because I hadn't heard this, was people with higher levels of education. Now, what the researchers did not do, since they based their findings on a poll of 2,000 people they conducted, was they didn't necessarily spell out why. So there are some clues out there, and there is some research that helps us to understand why each of these groups was affected the way they were. But the researchers at the University of Michigan did not answer that question for us. But of course, you and I can delve into some of those answers and try and figure out what's going on with these different populations.
Yeah. First, let's define our terms. When you say that the study measured the impact, it doesn't mean just solely the negative impact. Did any of these groups have an impact that was not as severe to their mental health as another group, for instance? I mean, I certainly understand individuals with poor health having a more negative mental health impact from this. But how about higher education people? Were they more likely to understand and feel a little safer about it? How did that break down?
Yeah, excellent question. So in regards to the four groups that I say were impacted here, so these were the groups that reported feeling heightened levels of anxiety, depression, or other mental health symptoms. Now, in regards to groups that did a little bit better or fared better, because the poll looked at people really across the spectrum of age demographics and age demographics and I should say gender demographics. One thing that we saw that I thought was really interesting was that people who were a little bit older, people over the age of 80 in this survey, said that they had fared the best and that some constituencies had put in some protocols like trying to improve their physical exercise, eat better, get healthier, that had a positive impact on their mental health. So not everybody in this study said that they were suffering. But in regard to the groups that we talked about, I think you asked me, why is it people with higher education might have reported they were having some troubles? So here's my take on that as I've tried to think about this. And just to be clear, I mean, this is my 2 cents here from people I've interviewed and people I've talked to. Frontline workers, many of whom have not had the opportunity to work from home, if you look empirically at the data, tend to be people who don't have the same levels of education as workers who have the flexibility of working remotely. So that would make you think, right, that the frontline workers, therefore, are the ones who are really suffering from a mental health perspective. That's not exactly what we saw in this, right? We saw that people with higher levels of education said that they were really suffering. I think if you're someone who has the flexibility of working from home, you might be taking advantage of it and holding off going back to the office, which we're seeing a lot of companies start to think about return to office, return to work, particularly in the world that I cover, which is banking. You might be holding off because you might be thinking it's not safe. And because you have higher levels of education, perhaps you're scrutinizing epidemiological data more, or you're scrutinizing news reports more than people on the front lines of this who realize it's very stressful, but I have to go to work. I have no choice, right? I'm facing other issues that are non-pandemic related or tied to the pandemic, but not necessarily public health related, like economic issues, which are related to the pandemic, losing a job, or facing the expiration of unemployment benefits that are pandemic related, but not public health related. You see the distinction? And I think that could be driving more anxiety for those populations. Now, again, it's really important with these kinds of things not to paint with broad strokes, because mental health is so malleable and it's so personal for everybody. And what upsets someone on one day could not bother them the next, but upset an entirely different person, right? Yeah. So a lot of this is when you catch people who are self-reporting. And I'm sure there are many people with lesser levels of education who are feeling extraordinary stress as a result of this pandemic. But I do think there's something to be said for this idea of privilege and luxury in our country. If you have higher levels of education and you can work remotely, maybe you have more time to take in more information and feel your anxieties around the dangers and detriments of this pandemic from a public health perspective. Whereas, you know, if you're somebody working at a gas station or a drugstore or grocery store and all year long you've had to go to work, you've had no choice, maybe you've had to come up with coping mechanisms to push aside some degree of anxiety from the public health crisis and just focus on keeping your job so you can put food on the table.
Yeah, that's a great point, but is plainly obvious, even without the pandemic as a backdrop. Yes, people who are working to feed their family and keep the electricity and water on don't have the luxury of feeling sorry for themselves. They just get up and do it. So that's a phenomenon that's always there. So in that context, and I agree with you, higher educated people have more opportunity to digest more information and then ponder it. And when and sometimes it's true that ignorance is bliss. If you can cut down some of the information flow, you're sort of, I know I am, my equilibrium can straighten out when I'm not getting bombarded. So if we look at all these groups together and factor in all the things you've said about what contributes to a mental health crisis associated with COVID, is it safe and scary to assume that this is already obvious, this mental health crisis, but this is a ticking time bomb? It's going to get bigger down the road, right?
I mean, absolutely. You know, the World Health Organization has been warning since last May. So this is now more than a year ago, going to be soon a year and a half ago, a few weeks into the pandemic, that there was a looming mental health crisis. People have been warning about what happened to the frontline workers and people who were in lockdown in the Chinese city of Wuhan last January and how that impacted their mental health for a very long time. This is a global issue. It's not retreating, right? Like, it's clear that the pandemic refuses to wane, and it won't even bow to the medical solutions that we've tried to put into place. You know, we have a vaccination campaign underway in the country, and in states like mine in Florida, which significantly lags other parts of the country in terms of vaccinations, just about 1 in 2 adults here that's eligible for a vaccine has gotten the vaccine. We have high levels of spread, worse than ever with the coronavirus among people who are not vaccinated. Now we're hearing that people who are vaccinated may need a booster. So the point is, you know, the pandemic is not disappearing anytime soon. The longer it lasts, the more damage it can do to everyone's mental health. And it's not just stress about what you see on the news. A lot of this pertains to job loss or substance use behaviors and substance use disorders that we saw forming last year, which are very difficult to shake. And we're going to see, I think, more and more people require residential care or long-term care to counteract the effects of substance use that they might have developed a dependency for. And in regards to women, I mean, this could be a generational problem. Women have really borne the brunt of the pandemic from a mental health perspective. And one thing the World Health Organization warned about last year, which predated this University of Michigan survey that you and I have been talking about, was they did say women are in a very difficult position with this because they're having to pick up most of the work around childcare and homeschooling. And they're also giving up leisurely activities or important activities that are good for their mental health, exercise, you know, their jobs, no less. I mean, you know, it's a serious problem the longer it goes on.
And again, even before the outbreak of the pandemic, with regard to young women, it was we were approaching high water marks for a general anxiety crisis among particularly young women. They were already anxious about a multitude of things, and then boom, this lands in their lap, and it's not making it any easier by a long shot. So, I don't know how much of this data came out of the Michigan study with regard to suicide rates. And see, when we talk about collateral damage from this virus in the mental health field, there's really no way, unless someone leaves a definitive note behind, who've taken their lives, they did so because of anxiety or fear of the virus. But what do we know about suicide rates during this pandemic?
Yeah, I'm pulling up the report specifically. So we did see that there were heightened levels of suicidal ideation among certain groups, and we've seen it really skyrocket for months. When it comes to suicidal ideation, I think it's fair to say that, okay, I want to back up a little. You mentioned a really excellent point, which is young women. Before the pandemic, there was data coming out showing that young women have been considering suicide, contemplating suicide for a very long time. I had dug into this heavily during my time covering the mental health beat, where I was taking a look at adolescent trauma. And I think we had seen record levels of suicidal ideation among young people, largely stemming from social media use, et cetera. In the absence of psychosocial interactions that we would call anhedonia, which are things that people do essentially to enjoy themselves, right? So seeing friends, being able to have access to classmates, suicidal ideation has absolutely increased in this country, and the numbers have too. I don't have the data right in front of me, but the University of Michigan study warned about it, and I have seen a preponderance of data that I think makes it very clear that suicide.
You know what else is fascinating here? It's, there's so many events of unintended consequence. The butterfly flaps its wing here, and the storm occurs someplace else. These young people who are suffering epidemic levels of anxiety to begin with find themselves isolated and cut off. Oh, but look, we've got social media. This pandemic has sort of taken the allure out of that. I think we're seeing higher levels of, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, I think we're seeing higher levels of a sense of isolation, no matter what social media's promises are about bringing people together. I think it isolates people. How do you feel?
150%. You and I are in total agreement on this. You are absolutely right. You know, social media has some great applications, like for me as a reporter, finding sources, you know, connecting with new people.
Oh,
but
yeah.
from a day-to-day kind of user perspective, I think social media has unleashed some really terrible consequences for young people, as far as comparing themselves to other people and making them feel that maybe they're the only ones who are isolated if someone they know living somewhere else with lower rates of case transmission or traveling or living their lives, making them feel left out of certain groups. When all you have to communicate with people is through, you know, a 6-inch phone screen and an app where it's really easy to delude other people about what actually is happening in your life, that's not a really healthy place to be starting from and forming a relationship. Social media also creates the possibility for a lot of remote bullying to go on. And I think we've known about online bullying for some time, but it might be scarier for the bully to try and bully, knowing that the student who they're bullying could come into school the next day and see them. That hasn't happened, right? There's been no accountability.
Yeah.
Throw someone under the bus and sandbag them and say terrible things online and not worry during the pandemic that you're going to run into them in person. So it makes it easier for people to target people. And I absolutely think it's contributed to this problem and probably has trained some very impressionable young people, I would think 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, in some unusual and perhaps deleterious friendship-related behaviors, since they've spent the last 18 months largely conducting friendships over social media.
Oh, yeah, over social media. I mean, there's going to be a period of adjustment. It may not be smooth when they're back in the same physical environment together. Again, we hate to be the doomsayers here, but it's a big, big problem. This virus's impact has been profound, and as we said at the beginning, spread out in all kinds of areas. All right, so let's pivot to the other stuff you took a look at through a couple of other studies, not least of which from Yale University. It would have to do with alcohol consumption and abuse in the context of COVID. Now, I got to stop you right now. I can't. It isn't like a month goes by where, and you're in this all the time, so you see it, where you don't read about study done right about something. And sometimes the reaction is they had to study that, right? They had to study that. So, when I see that Yale looked at, alcohol consumption under young people, particularly in New York, and I went, really, I can tell you in 5 minutes what happened. They drank a lot of alcohol, and it probably wasn't good. So that's, having said that, it's still interesting to ask questions about how this happened. So what did the Yale study actually say about the teen drinking during this?
Listen, I agree with you. Sometimes, quantifying things that are so obvious, there's definitely value to have empirical data and clinical data, and the application of that can be used to make better kinds of decisions from a policy perspective. But sometimes you read about these things and it's really obvious, and it's not exactly eye-opening information. But the Yale School of Public Health did do some research. Now, back at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in New York City, and I remember those early days of like pandemonium, right? It was really pandemonium, where people were, tearing everything off of supermarket shelves. I would see, in the first 2 days, there was no water, there was no toilet paper, there was very little food, rice was sold out, pasta was gone. It was truly, pandemonium in New York City back in that time. And what this particular study looked at was in the early days of COVID and in the lockdowns that we saw, what people were doing as far as consuming high levels of alcohol and what it was doing to them. So they took a look at survey data from 600 young people. And I have more to add on this, by the way, in a second, about generally other research about young people and alcohol consumption that I think might be a bit more eye-opening. But this Yale School of Public Health study that's recently been reported in the journal Alcoholism Treatment Quarterly took a look at data from 600 young people. And what they found was increased alcohol use shared a connection. It's unclear if it's just a correlation or causation with anxiety, sleep disturbances, and this was perhaps the most interesting finding, positive COVID-19 diagnoses. So they found increased alcohol among people who had been diagnosed with COVID, which I think is very, very interesting. And what they found was that, there were warnings about consuming alcohol if you were infected with the virus, but seems like a lot of people didn't heed those warnings. Go figure, right? And they found that, quote, the stress of the diagnosis led many to crave alcohol and drink more as a result. Listen, if you are threatened by a life-threatening disease like COVID-19, which is not a chronic disease, it's a disease that is an infectious, respiratory disease, you'd be really nervous in those first few weeks. And I think it shows a lot of people, unfortunately, see substances as a way to alleviate anxiety, even when they know they shouldn't be drinking, not just because excessive alcohol is unhealthy, but excessive alcohol while you're fighting the coronavirus is particularly unhealthy, but
The alcohol falls into a special category with regard to people who seek self-medication because it's so accessible. And because it's part of the social fabric, you have a drink. I mean, even people who didn't anesthetize themselves during this thing, at least in my experience, are drinking more at home. Obviously, you're drinking more at home. There was no other place to drink. I mean, people who were social drinkers before the pandemic, probably many of them rarely thought about having a drink at home. Let's have a martini before dinner, honey. That went on in the movies, but not where I grew up. But I'll bet you a lot of people, in the past 2 years now, let's have a drink. Let's have another bottle of wine. And what's interesting about alcohol is,
Steve, that I would just add to that, and I think that's such an astute point. And the one thing I would add is the cost. I do think there's an element of what's cost prohibitive. In past, people would go out and meet friends for happy hour, it lasts 2 hours, get a couple of drinks on discount, go to a big dinner. Maybe you don't drink 3-4 glasses of wine because, that could be $80 in wine alone in New York. If you're home, a bottle of wine could cost $15-$20. So why not buy 2 or 3? The bang for the buck, seriously, I think has something to do with it. Goes way further for a lot of people who realize we didn't have anywhere to go and it's cheaper to drink at home anyway.
Yeah. A lot of people have been given an education about how they've been getting ripped off at these restaurants on the price of a bottle of wine. The other thing that went on, and this is another sad fact of life, is that the beverage industry is clever. They know that there are people who drink hard liquor, who like their bourbon, and there are other wider consumers who like something a little less obvious. What'd you find out about hard seltzers? First of all, what are hard seltzers?
It's an excellent question. So hard seltzers are drinks like White Claw, or there's another brand called Four Loko. They're these canned beverages that look like a soda can, and you pop them open and they're carbonated fizzy drinks. And part of their allure for a lot of younger folks is, one, I think they're easy to transport. 2, they're very sugary. So their tastes tend to appeal to younger consumers. And they don't really have a pronounced alcohol like taste. How sometimes you drink a strong alcohol and you get that like taste. This just tastes like soda, so they say. I mean, I will admit I've tasted White Claw. It's really not my thing. I'm not a big, hard seltzer consumer myself. So I think a lot of other younger people are. And one interesting piece of research that was done, this was a very interesting piece of research that I reported on back in June. There was the study that found that $17 billion worth of alcohol were consumed by U.S. underage adults during the age 2016. So this is during the year 2016. So this is, 4 years before the pandemic even started.
Billion.
Billion with a B. Exactly. Yep. Not million with an M. 17 billion with a B dollars worth of alcohol that was sold in the United States that year was consumed by people under the age of 21 who shouldn't be drinking at all. And a lot of that was in the hard seltzer category. So what we decided to do at Business Insider, we saw this research and we thought, gosh, this is a really concerning study. And the reason why this study came out in 2021 was that was the most recently available sort of comprehensive consumer data that the researchers were able to get their hands on from 2016. I'm sure it has probably only accelerated since then. So we spoke to some behavioral health experts who said, oh yeah, this has been a huge problem during COVID. The rise of a lot of these products like White Claw, which by the way, went on sale in 2016. So not to blame them necessarily for this problem, but just interesting to note that they went on sale that year and they've been widely available on shelves since then. The rise of drinks like this.
And let me interrupt you there. I know you'll get around to this. Available in supermarkets. So, the stigma of having to go into a packaged goods store has all been alleviated. But it also explains why young underage kids can probably get served a lot easier if they're buying it from supermarkets, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to present an ID at the grocery store, but I think it's much easier if you can grab somebody's older brother or sibling who's over the age of 21, or you have a fake ID and say, hey, toss a couple of those in the cart. I mean, it absolutely, I'm sure, contributes to the issue in many ways when these things are available.
Reed, how many times do you think youngsters said to their parents, I'm talking about teenagers, going, hey, Mama, let me go to the store with you. Let me go show.
Oh, totally.
So mom's shopping, and they're going, "Hey, mom, throw a couple of these in there. What's mom though? Looks like a canned drink, right?" So a lot of that went on. And
I am sure. You know what, Steve? It's such a good point, especially in those early days of this product.
Right.
Popular. I'm sure people said this is a really cool new soda, or everybody drinks it at school. And, there were probably parents who were none the wiser and just threw it right in the cart. You're right. No, seriously. So what this study looked at, and by the way, this was done by researchers at the University of North Carolina, was that level of alcohol consumption amounted for about 8.6, so under 10% of all of the alcohol sold in the US in 2016. That went to young people. They looked at beverages from multiple brands, and they found that AB InBev, Miller Coors, and Diageo were the brands that really represented the lion's share, more than half of all the alcohol that was consumed by young people. And I thought this was really interesting. The lead researcher on the study, Pamela Trangenstein at the University of North Carolina, told me in an interview, quote, "The research shows time and time again that young people, if they haven't started to drink, or if they're exposed to alcohol advertising over time, they're more likely to start drinking. If they've already started drinking, they're more likely to progress to heavier drinking." And one element of what she found was that advertising plays a huge part in selling young people on that it's cool and it's enticing and alluring to start drinking early. I mean, we've seen that with cigarettes and nicotine, right? And we've seen huge lawsuits in which companies have had to roll back advertising campaigns around smoking cigarettes and nicotine. It raises questions. Should there be some sort of legal consequences for companies that are found to be engaging in marketing efforts that appeal to these younger consumers? And then I will tell you, if we can pause there, Steve, if you have any follow-up questions, but there are some other really interesting data points I think we should look at just about more recent alcohol consumption in the past year, because we're talking about things from 2016.
Yeah, no, I do want you to get to that, but just make this additional point, because you're correct. You're absolutely correct. One of the brilliance of the advertising campaigns from those big beverage companies, and this goes back 20, 30 years, beer in particular. Now, I'm not a teetotaler. I'm not a beer drinker, but I'm not a teetotaler. Beer can be consumed responsibly for sure. But what Madison Avenue has done over the years is turn beer drinking into a lifestyle choice that appears to signal health and vitality, right? Mm-hmm. You rarely see, they're always on the beach. They're always on the beach, and they're always thin, and they're always attractive. And it looks like
people, right.
It turns beer into a health food, which it is not. Okay. Anyway, that being said, I'm off my soapbox. Now tell us what's going on now with regard to consumption.
By the way, I just want to say that's a really excellent point that I have not thought of before, that a lot of physically fit people are represented in the media as, cracking open a beer. And one would think that that's an aspirational thing for you to do if you attain that level of physical fitness, or, you have a lot of really great friends and you're outside enjoying the open air. I think you're absolutely right. So the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics was taking a look at this in the past year throughout 2020, right, which was this really terrible pandemic year. And they found that more than half of 12th graders, so 55%, more than 1 in 2 12th graders in America, had abused alcohol, not just drank alcohol, had abused alcohol. That's how common it is at the high school level, at least one point, potentially multiple points. They were followed by 10th graders, so about 40%, 4 in 10 10th graders, had abused alcohol, according to this research, at least one point last year, and 1/5 of 8th graders. So, think about it. Even freshmen in high school is 9th grade. So kids in middle school have been found to be doing this. So this is how widespread this situation is. I interviewed a psychiatrist in New York, Scott Krakauer. He's with the Zucker Hillside Hospital in New York. And he told me that one big issue is that a lot of people were having house parties when they should not have been during the pandemic. And it was really easy to drink alcohol from home if you're having a house party during the pandemic. He said this, and I thought this was very interesting. Usually drinking ends when you have a place to go to end it. When the keg party was over, it would be over. In this situation, you're kind of trapped. So, I thought that was really, really interesting. There was no way out. And, a lot of young people got sucked in.
Well, listen, it's a big topic, and we could spend hours in the weeds on this thing. The ripples from the pandemic effect are so widespread. But thanks so much for bringing us up to speed on a couple of items. We've painted, let's face it, not a terrific picture about the mental health aspects of this disease. There is another side to this, and that is there's lots of places to get help. Yeah. Both residential and outpatient. And the other side of the internet story is there's plenty of stuff online, good stuff online. Telemedicine is a big, big deal, and it can help as well. And so can people like our guest, Reed Alexander, whose job it is to inform us about this stuff. And we appreciate that, your work and your time. Any news you can give your fans on the showbiz front? Where's Neville? Is he coming back?
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for this really terrific conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, in regards to iCarly, which is very exciting, the revival of the show has been met with tremendous success, which is amazing to see on Paramount Plus. And it's on now. And Neville, my character there that I played for many years, is up to some nefarious tricks. So I suggest everyone check out our special, which was called iRobot Wedding. And good news, the show has been renewed for season 2. So all I can say is, and I've talked about this, I can't go into detail on what is being planned, mostly because I don't know. I don't think any of us know. I think the writers are soon to start fleshing out what season looks like. But I wouldn't put it past Neville to always hold a grudge and be out to plan some evil schemes. So if anyone watched iCarly, I would say tune back into season 2 for a lot of good times, Neville or otherwise. I truly don't know what the future holds for the show, but I know that it's going to be a pretty remarkable season because we've got great writers working on it. So
that's great.
That's what I would say.
Good luck, break a leg. And again, thanks so much. And we'll cross paths many more times here on the Behavioral Corner. Hey, you guys, don't forget to follow us, look for us, like us, do the whole thing wherever podcasts are had these days. It's the Behavioral Corner. Reed, take care. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Steve. All the best.
At Retreat Behavioral Health, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 and begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.